Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Hammer Museum. I'm Claudia Bester. I'm the Director of Public Programs here at the Hammer, and I'm pleased to welcome you to tonight's program. Throughout 2018, the Hammer Museum and the UCLA Sustainable LA Grand Challenge are exploring the technology, infrastructure, and ideas that make Los Angeles that can make Los Angeles the first entirely sustainable megacity in the United States. We're calling this series Future LA: Engineering a Sustainable Supercity. Each month we're doing a programming focusing on one specific arena, such as building a sustainable energy grid, mobility and the future of transportation, new visions of the LA River, and what the built environment is going to look like as our population grows. Tonight, first our panelists will each give brief presentations here at the podium, and then they'll all sit down for discussion with our moderator, Mark Gold, and then at the end we'll take audience questions. Tonight we're going to talk about cohabitation between wildlife and humans in the ever-evolving ecosystem of Los Angeles. Our panelists will discuss the intersection of the built environment and LA's natural habitats as we deal with a hotter and more populous future that will challenge the dynamic between urban environments, wildlife, and nature. So first I'm going to give you a little background on each of the presenters, and then we'll kick off the discussion. Our first panelist is Dr. Lori Bettison-Varga, the president and director of the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County, which includes the museum and exposition park, as well as the La Brea Tar Pits and the William S. Hart Museum in Newhall, California. Under her leadership, the Natural History Museum has inaugurated major new initiatives in research, exhibitions, community science, and community engagement. Her goal is to expand the Natural History Museum's role as a museum of, for, and with Los Angeles, and to create an interdisciplinary model for understanding and connecting to urban nature. In 2015, the Natural History Museum launched the Urban Nature Research Center, which is the first integrative research center in the United States dedicated to urban biodiversity, and the scientists involved in the project are supervising the largest urban biodiversity study in the world. Bettison-Varga earned her BA in geology from UC Santa Barbara and her master's and doctorate at UC Davis. She then served as director of the Keck Geology Consortium, after which she was the provost and dean of faculty at Whitman College in Washington until 2009. Dr. Ryan Harrigan is an assistant professor of the UCLA Institute of the Environment and Sustainability and the Center for Tropical Research. His main research interests include the evolutionary biology and ecology of species and species complexes, including infectious diseases. He's especially interested in cases where human forces like global transport, land use conversion, and climate change are likely contributing to complex natural processes, including how we interact with infectious diseases, and understanding how these changes understanding these changes is key to preventing large-scale epidemics. His current work is focused on how anthropogenic stressors have affected the spread of recently introduced multi-host pathogens such as avian influenza and West Nile virus, and how migrant bird populations have been affected by such introductions. Then our final panelist is landscape designer Mia Lehrer. She's recognized internationally for progressive landscape design and for advocating for sustainable and people-friendly public spaces. Mia has led the design and implementation of projects in the public and private spheres, including the new Hollywood Park racetrack redevelopment and the new NFL stadium in Inglewood, the gardens at the Natural History Museum of LA County, Vista Hermosa Natural Park near downtown LA, and many Los Angeles River-related projects. She earned her Master's of Landscape Architecture degree from Harvard University's Grad School of Design. So now I'd like to bring up our moderator, Mark Gold. Mark Gold's not coming up now. First is going to be Dr. Bettison-Varga. But our moderator, Mark Gold, formerly served as president of the environmental group Heal the Bay, which is dedicated to making Southern California coastal waters and watersheds safe, healthy, and clean. Mark has worked extensively over the last 20 years in the field of coastal protection and water pollution. In particular, he's worked on research projects on urban runoff pollution, DDT and PCB contamination in fish, and the health risks of swimming at runoff-contaminated beaches. He created Heal the Bay's Beach Report Card and has authored or co-authored numerous California coastal protection, water quality, and environmental education bills. Gold was recently appointed UCLA's Associate Vice Chancellor for Environment and Sustainability, and he received his bachelor's and master's in biology and his doctorate in environmental science and engineering, all here at UCLA. Woo. So now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Lori Bettison-Varga.
Good evening. It's nice to see all of you here on a rainy night. We like the rain, right? Yes, okay. I just want to say I'm delighted to be here and a part of this panel, and I want to thank Mark Gold and the Hammer. Institute of Environment and Sustainability is a great partner of the Natural History Museum. So one of the key things I want you to walk away with tonight is that your LA County Natural History Museum is one of the most important museums in the world. You may not know that we have the largest collection west of the Mississippi and one of the largest collections in the world. And that's really important to this topic tonight because, of course, we hold the record, all these museums together hold the record of Earth's biodiversity. So in the last decade, before I came to the Natural History Museum in 2015, the museum made a decision to expand beyond what we classically think of as natural history into living nature. And as such, I could say the Natural History Museum in Expo Park really is very much a museum about nature and culture. So what you see here on this the screen is the nature gardens that opened in 2013, created by the great Mia Lehrer, in combination with our staff as a wonderful living laboratory that you're going to hear a little bit more about. And inside the Nature Lab, which really focuses on urban nature. And it's a great indoor-outdoor experience for our visitors to understand what lives around us here in LA. So why did we make the shift? Okay, it's not moving. There we go. So you all know this map of the world at night, and it illustrates very well what scientists have known since 2009, that over half the world's population lives in cities, and that's only increasing. But what we don't know is very much about the wildlife in these cities, and LA is one of 5 megacities. I think it's also known, of course, that the public mostly thinks that biodiversity exists outside of cities. And even scientists really have spent a lot of time studying nature in kind of places that you think of as undisturbed. So at the Natural History Museum, we have wonderful research scientists, in addition to these collections, who study animals in environments all around the world, but they can apply this expertise to what is in Los Angeles. And they do this because we're sitting in one of the world's 35 biodiversity hotspots, where we have a lot of biodiversity, but it's threatened. So as Claudia just mentioned, in 2016, we launched at the museum our Urban Nature Research Center, which was a goal to integrate the work across these various departments that had been going on for quite some time. And we now have a team of 4 scientists, hopefully a 5th soon as we're hiring an ornithologist, postdocs, collection managers, and, of course, community science department. So here's the problem. How do you study biodiversity in this region when most of the land is under private ownership? So we don't want to have our scientists getting charged for trespassing. And we can actually find lots of playgrounds and parks, trees along city streets where we can do this work, but we know that a lot of what we need to look at is in people's backyards. So what we did was really kind of amass a team of our community members. And many of you know this as citizen science. We at the museum have made it community science. We're still part of the citizen science community, but we wanted to make sure that our program was one that embraced everybody in our community, and we wanted to ensure that the programs that we have were ones that were broadly and inclusive in that work. So let's talk a little bit about what that is. We define community science as a project or activity in which volunteers and scientists work together to answer real-world questions. And it's really that working together with scientists at the museum. So at the top here, we have, of course, who's that? P22, right? Yes. In fact, it first seen on camera by a biologist on our staff, Miguel Ordeñana. So there's an allure in P22, right? Because he's charismatic. You all know him as LA's most eligible bachelor. That he's crossed the 405, the 101. He's lived through rat poison and urbanization. But there's a lot more to LA urban nature than big charismatic mammals. Our entomologist curator, Brian Brown, has a lot of experience discovering insects in tropical areas like Costa Rica. So he started to get curious about local biodiversity, and he talked with one of our board members and said, I bet I can find a new species in your backyard. What he did was he set up a Malaise trap in the backyard, and sure enough, he found a new species of phorid fly, that little thing, and they're really tiny. Over the time since he started to do that, we've discovered over 40 new species of these flies in LA. And so these are equally as important as the large charismatic mammal, the big cat to the tiny fly. We understand that there are a range of species that live here. But we can't inventory this alone, and that's where we come into community science, crowdsourcing observations. So we've begun to host bio-blitzes in neighborhoods and at schools with librarians out in the nature together in just the neighborhoods, but also in canyons and other areas. And of course, inviting people to have traps in their backyard, and of course, to take pictures using iNaturalist and submitting those up through that program, that app, into our scientific projects. So it's been very successful for us. And I do want to actually take a moment to plug one of the ways that we're doing this now to really create awareness about community science. So we started 2 years ago with the Cal Academy in San Francisco, the City Nature Challenge. It started out with our two institutions, both really committed to community science, and said, okay, let's have a challenge, and we launched it. We had a real success with that program, so much so that we had 16 cities in the US participate last year, 124,000 observations, 8,557 species, 4,051 participants. You can help us this year because we're going global. So what started 2 years ago as a challenge between our two cities, our two areas, to get as many observations as we could about what's living in our backyards and in our neighborhoods has really become now a worldwide initiative to really understand what's living in our cities with us. So I think it's a great program. We'll talk a little bit about this, I know, on the panel discussion, that it's an opportunity for all of you to make observations that help advance what we understand about what's living in our community and how we can foster that biodiversity. So my 5 minutes are up, and it's now time for Ryan to come on.
Hey, good evening, everybody. How's everyone doing? There's a green room at the Hammer. I found out about that tonight. We've been there since noon, so this partying hard. So this panel, it looks like the Guns N' Roses played back there or something. It's that we left it a mess, so I apologize. I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about urban biodiversity and a project that we have through the city and the grand challenges called the LA Biodiversity Atlas. And I'll give you a fun example that's local, so hopefully we can kind of all sort of take part in this community science. So when we think about the campus at UCLA, I already messed up. I'm sorry. It was already up. Sorry. Okay, we're good. These are just two maps showing you climate in general. This is temperature and precipitation in Los Angeles County. I probably don't have to tell anyone in the room that LA County has a lot of different climates in the Southern California region in general. You know, you can go from Malibu, where it might be 70 degrees, up to the mountains where it might be 50, and then out to the desert where it might be 90 plus or 100 degrees. This is really unusual for such a small geographic space. I grew up in the East Coast, so you know, you can go through all the Massachusetts and it's just cold with Dunkin' Donuts. That's it. So this is pretty incredible to be able to drive an hour and see vastly different biomes or ecoregions. Precipitation, as we found out tonight, can be unpredictable. We don't really know how that's going to change as well in the future. We know it's going to get warmer, but we don't really know if it's going to get wetter or when that rain or that precipitation will come. So this is a very dynamic system, but that dynamic heterogeneic system leads to a lot of different species. And so this, you know, something that's good for us is also good for other species living here. LA County and Southern California has historically done a pretty good job preserving areas. So those green outlined areas here are protected areas. But you might notice that we're not so heterogeneous in terms of where we preserve things. Why do you think that is? Why is there no protected areas here? Well, it's flat. Somebody said cities. It's just valuable land. So historically we have a way of preserving areas that no one really wants for anything else. And that's not just LA County, that's everywhere across the globe. And so when you look at the places that we preserve, we do a pretty good job in the mountains at elevation and some areas out in the desert. But here, well, this isn't so great for preserved or protected areas. Why is that? We talked about it. All of that pink and red represents impervious surfaces. So that's things like Dunkin' Donuts. And we're not sponsored by Dunkin' Donuts, are we? Pavement and buildings, things that generally critters, plants don't do a good job growing in. And so one of the issues here is to sort of how better to integrate these preserved areas into this impervious. And this impervious, it looks massive and it looks like, oh, maybe we're all done stretching out the city. But this impervious structure building and urbanization happens at a slow enough pace that we don't always catch it. And to sort of show you an example that I'd like to just use UCLA as an example. So this is not an arrow. I wanted this to be this small. This was UCLA in 1929, where it consisted of 4 buildings. And a paleontologist, actually the paleontologist that did a lot of the La Brea tar pit excavations, Dr. Loy Miller, was an amateur ornithologist. And he had the foresight to say, let me just go out and record things that I saw on campus. And here's some of the things he found. So these species, along with over 100 additional ones. So he found a total of 115 different bird species on campus. These species, like the California quail, enjoy chaparral or arroyo habitats. Greater roadrunners, he documented. This is available online. It's called the Birds of Westwood. And I encourage you to flip through it. It's like a giant PDF, but a wonderful read, and he's done illustrations of everything. The giant greater roadrunner would hop on people's cars, so probably old Pontiacs and Plymouths, rest in peace, right? Prairie falcons, so no need for rodenticides. They're taking care of a lot of the rodents in the area, even things like Bell's vireo and the horned lark. A team of students and myself, this included undergraduates, graduates, and myself, went out on campus and said, let's see what's still there. Let's see what we can still see on campus. And these 6 species, unfortunately, are no longer on campus. So they disappeared. What do you think they were replaced by? Squirrels, rodents. How about undergrads? So we just got more campus. And so this isn't like an anti-growth or anti-expansion of UCLA. I mean, I work there, so we're presenting at the Hammer. So I'm not saying all growth is bad, but we kind of need to think about how to better integrate. So there's 419 acres on UCLA campus. About 12 of those acres are left for natural areas. We need to think about how to better preserve or integrate those things that were once there and the undergrads that we have there now. I don't want to, that's depressing, right? I don't want to leave you with that. So let me leave you with good news. These are drawings that I didn't do these. These are drawings of various different groups and the number of species we still have in LA County of each of them. So 18 species of amphibians, 46 species of reptiles, about 40 fish, 200 just mammals, and 226 butterflies and moths. So this is some of the work that the Natural History Museum uncovered. Not all insects, right? Just moths and butterflies. Over 500 species of birds can be seen in LA County. That's about 5% of the world's birds. There's about 10,000 birds total. So you can see 5% of the world's birds in LA County. I mean, that is insane. That's so cool to me. What I want to do is say we have all of this diversity here. Let's do a better job of making sure that when urbanization or growth occurs, we can integrate humans and what Dr. Miller referred to as the first folk of LA County and the Southern California region. So with that, I'll turn it over to our next speaker, and thank you guys.
Thank you. We have a lot to share here, and what's happening? Am I supposed to do something, or are you doing something? Okay. Hello. Okay. So you can see who I am, and I'm part of an amazing studio. Kat Superfiski's here with me today, and maybe other people, I don't know. But thank you for this wonderful panel discussion, which I hope we will have. And I think I want to make it clear that I'm bringing the perspective about the importance of design in achieving cohabitation. I had to remind Mark Gold that cohabitation in the 1960s was a different type of cohabitation in dorms, where boys and girls actually slept in the same rooms. But beyond that, I guess there's cohabitation going on right now in our cities. And I wanted to start out by sort of describing the lens through which some of us look at. Okay. No. So why can't I go to the next slide? No. That's the last slide. Somebody, guys. Yes, I'm pushing the green button. Try the red one. Yes. Maybe somebody from upstairs. No, but that's not. Keep going. Okay. Coming, happening. Okay. So as designers, we geek out in trying to sort of understand better sort of where we're going. So let's just describe the lens through which we think about design. So what is resilience? The capacity for a system to survive, adapt, and flourish in the face of turbulent change. Adaptation, efforts by society or ecosystems prepare for or to adjust to future climate change. And just moving on down, you can read some of the rest, but there's urban ecology, there's recalibration, maybe we don't concretize our rivers and we try to do an alternative solution to sort of dealing with flood protection. But design and landscape urbanism, a multidisciplinary sort of field intersecting art, design, and the earth and social science to plan and design public and private landscapes and infrastructures in a way that offers solutions to problems. I'm going to really be pissed. So good. Okay. So you've seen a little, I had the honor and privilege of working with all the scientists and the educators from the Natural History Museum. I used to call them my ologists meetings, to really try to understand how we could create a series of gardens in an asphalt parking lot, meaning we removed the parking lot and created this new space for the community to really understand the nature that surrounds them. And we understood the surrounding context. And really looked at the opportunities for specialized niche habitats for plants, spiders, birds, bees, and butterflies. And we were able, I think, to create this refuge that, of course, has taken on sort of a new kind of, Jesus Christ. Can somebody from up there come and sort of deal with this, please? Not.
Can you go forward?
Yeah,
Or backwards?
I'm trying to go forward, of course. So then, yeah, okay,
Okay, just this one there.
okay. When we're calling this, we called this the living wall. That means that, we built this elements that sort of supported biodiversity in these conversations that we had as we were planning for then eventually building these gardens. And we had bird blinds and other sort of opportunities to so these were spaces for people and creatures. And they provided this opportunity for exploration. And one of the things that, of course, they did was they actually provided this opportunity for all these kinds of sort of community type activities and this Richard night and day events, and really made people comfortable with the kinds of sort of research and opportunities and learning that happened in this place. Part of course, the Exposition Park area. So what we did was we thought we were changing people's perception of nature. And I will always remember the day that when I went into my bathtub, which always has spiders, I opted not to sort of freak out or step on the spider, but instead realize what the wonders that spiders do for us in the world. And that was a significant moment for us in my family. So that's a 300-acre, that's a 3.5-acre park that really changed sort of, I think, the perception of many young people going to elementary school, but also weekend visitors, about what sort of Los Angeles biodiversity could look like. And of course, we can scale that up to a park that was built, a 10-acre park that was built around the same time, overlooking downtown Los Angeles. And the park was designed with many different types of uses in mind. And it was basically meant to provide nature trails and picnic areas, and really it was a windows to the mountains. The Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy was the founder, and it was associated with 2 high schools. So what it offers is the opportunity for people to relate to sort of the natural environment, to really understand. And the day the trees started getting delivered, the amount of birds that arrived were incredible. They were just so excited to find this new place to sort of perch. And so, of course, part of this experience is how do people cohabitate with these new kinds of parks where, no, there wasn't prefabricated equipment. There was a nice snake that you had to become familiar with. And there were all these opportunities for environmental education in the heart of our city, and to change really people's perception of nature and of the type of nature that we should come to expect in our climate. Because if you ask people what it is that they would like to see, they would like to see Central Park, of course. And so it's a very different kind of experience. So with that, of course, we can go to sort of connecting people, and especially children, to nature in a city, which is really important. And of course, doing that in our schools is one of the most important things that we can do. Turning asphalt playgrounds, as you could see in the top, into areas that support nature and the exploration of it improves health and test scores, and helps to create the next generation of urban conservationists, we think. And it's not just about creating patches that remain islands in a sea of concrete and infrastructure, but rather it's about cleverly identifying a land use typology, such as a school site, that has the ability to offer a systematic and regional impact. So schools are a great example of how small-scale interventions can have a significant ecological and social impact, not only on their own, but especially when we start connecting these ideas together and these sites together and thinking about them as a way to create a more connected network of cohabitation throughout our urban areas. And which brings me to the last project I will highlight. And again, we're designers, so we just have to show images. The Urban Wildlife Connectivity Analysis, where we partnered with the National Wildlife Federation to analyze how urban systems can enhance rather than impede connectivity for both humans and wildlife, establishing a framework for cohabitation. So we mapped natural features, infrastructural features, and socio-political features within the Los Angeles region. Worked with scientists to select 7 target taxa and determine their unique needs and map their current and potential distributions, and began to identify elements within our urban areas that we could rethink from obstacles to opportunities for cohabitation. Existing infrastructure in our cities doesn't have to remain single purpose. Public bus routes can help people and pollinators move about the city by just rethinking the way we design our shelters. Our rivers, although encased in concrete, boy, this is the hardest. Our rivers, although encased in concrete, don't have to serve solely as a flood control channel. Something like the LA River can simultaneously provide essential habitat for migrating shorebirds and public access to recreational opportunities. How many of you have been to the LA River? Oh, awesome. Not as many as I thought, though. Achieving cohabitation in cities like Los Angeles is completely achievable. Nature was here and nature is here, proving that cohabitation is completely possible, and achieving cohabitation will require a systems thinking and collaborative approach amongst an entire army of urban wild warriors. I'm proud to be one of those warriors and to be able to contribute what I can through design. Where is P22 in all of this? He doesn't want to be here. Okay. So actually, P22 visited our house in Los Feliz, so just recently, so you know. Anyway, so we're looking forward to the conversation, and we're very optimistic about how we can sort of make our city one of those really examples of how we can collaborate across disciplines and really establish a framework where we can live with creatures and habitat in a very sort of symbiotic way. Thank you.
Well, thanks everybody. So to put our pending discussion in a little bit of context, what we're doing at UCLA with the Sustainable LA Grand Challenge is very bold from the standpoint of looking at the LA County region and what sort of research that's necessary to get to 100% renewable energy, which we talked about last month, as well as 100% local water and enhanced ecosystem and environmental health. And in that regard, obviously we're talking about ecosystem health here today. We have an enormous opportunity as well as challenge here within the Los Angeles region. You heard from Lori, obviously, about the incredible biodiversity that exists here in LA County because of the diversity of habitats that we have here. But at the same time, we have a long history of building out Los Angeles and sprawling to the more natural areas, even though, as Ryan pointed out, we've protected a lot of the hillside and mountainous regions. As an example, very precious coastal wetland left in Los Angeles County because we destroyed that pretty early on in the evolution of the city. And so really the question is, how can we thrive, cohabitate, if you will, with nature in the built environment in a way that we really haven't before? And so, Ryan, if you could give us a little bit of context on the work that you're doing at UCLA with Tom Gillespie and others on looking at the Biodiversity Atlas and some of the things that you found so far.
Yeah, sure. I think that's a good summary of it. The Biodiversity Atlas is looking, and this is kind of embarrassing from a scientist's point of view, but we, going into this, we realized we didn't really know what was out there. And there's very few. So I highlighted the Loy Miller story about birds, but somebody in 1929 wasn't out here looking for insects as thoroughly, or looking for all the native plants that were on campus or in the city. So when we started this project, we realized, wow, it'd be a good baseline. A place to start would be to just find out what we actually have here, and to sort of spatially map that so we can think about how to best. Conservation happens in a spatial context, and so people take a parcel of land and conserve it. So the idea is to take as many species as we can. I wanted more bird species, but you said 10 max. We have plants. I guess people study plants. They're important. Insects, fish, mammals, all those things. I get it. We're taking all of those things and mapping and see. And community science, new term. Community science is very important here. So for birds, there's an online database called eBird, and we're able to sort of see people's reports of birds in the LA County region in Southern California. We can use those points. Every point that a bird is seen, we can say, oh, that's the type of environment that bird prefers or spends time in. And then we can predict across all of LA. So even if there isn't an observation in an area, we can say, wow, that environment is very similar to the environments where the birds do occur. And so there's a probabilistic chance or high probability that a bird would occur there. We're doing that to sort of spatially, explicitly define where we see particular species or where we're likely to see them, so that we can sort of better inform conservation decisions. And this isn't just for native things. This is also we have students working on invasive species. So that's sort of the opposite, where we're trying to determine where those invasive species are and how to maybe get rid of them. And sort of thinking about this on a sort of community, at a community level. So what's good for insects and plants might be good for birds as well. Trying to really use a multi-taxa approach.
And just to follow up, because I also know, besides looking at the atlas and looking at things like climate and drought and rate of wildfire in the region, obviously you're part of a very large group on campus that's looking at conservation genomics and the importance of looking at that sort of at the LA region, and really from the standpoint of potential resilience to climate change. What are some of the sorts of things that are going on there on campus that are relevant here?
Sure. Okay. Do you guys want to nerd out a little? Okay. Rad. Okay. So I was talking about sort of species numbers, and what Mark's sort of hinting at is even within a single species, we're a group at the Center for Tropical Research and other folks within the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology Department at UCLA. We're looking at within a single species, there's genetic variation, just like there's genetic variation for all the people in this room. And we're looking how to maximize that genetic diversity even within a species. Because the hope is that under climate change, just temperature, we're expected to raise 4 degrees Celsius in parts of Los Angeles County, which is insane. We're hoping that with a rise in temperature, if you have a lot of genetic heterogeneity, maybe a few of those that have the right sort of genetic makeup will make it through climate change. You're sort of bet hedging and saying, okay, well, we just maximize sort of the portfolio of genes that we have to be able to adapt. That's the stuff of evolution, right? Adaptation and genetic changes. So we're hoping that even within a species, we can maximize the amount of genetic stuff, evolutionary stuff we have in a species, and hopefully some of those individuals will make it through climate change.
I just have to follow up.
Yeah.
How do you propose maximizing the genetic variation?
So we can look at the genetics across, let's say, LA County or Southern California and see which different environments hold different genetics.
Yeah, I get that, but it sounds like you're going to intervene when you say
No.
you want to maximize it.
No,
Just
what
in
I mean
terms
though is in terms of conservation, we wouldn't want to conserve just one type of genetics, one area that only has a
absolutely,
single
absolutely.
gene. So we're trying.
And in areas where you have the
Yeah.
most heterogeneity, those are the ones that are
Do you
most
want-
critical to protect.
Right. So you want to maximize different types of environments where a species might occur so that you're maximizing
So you want to
the
correlate.
conservation, not
Yeah. You want to correlate.
We're not
then-
cloning anything.
No, I was just like, well, wait a
Get me in
minute.
trouble.
Maybe it's the painkillers.
No,
but
no, we have no robot birds. Wink, wink. No, just kidding. We do.
Right. So you're using that data then to say these are the places where the first kind of conservation efforts would be the most critical to put in place in a policy perspective.
Yeah, that's right. And what we're finding is that these not surprisingly, these gradients between different habitats are really the key. So things like hillsides or where you move from a valley to a mountain, even if you have the same species in those environments, those two the genetics of those two populations might be very different even within the same species. So let's save both of those if we can and conserve both of those.
So, Lori, question for you. I've been absolutely thrilled with Natural History Museum's use of community science from the standpoint of working with the community, using iNaturalist, getting really the community involved and caring about nature in their own backyard, and that it doesn't have to be, going up into the mountains or going onto Santa Monica Bay. It's something very local that everybody can relate to. I know you've got big plans for how you'd like to see that grow out. Why don't you talk a little bit about that and what you hope to have Natural History Museum really take this next level?
So I think, obviously we've seen a rapid expansion in the numbers of people that are using iNaturalist, and you have to understand that the best way for us to get observations is by deploying all of you. So for example, Greg Polly, our herpetologist, says there are 3 kind of conventional science ways of identifying lizard sex. There's 3 recorded examples of this kind of neck biting thing that happens. So he put out a call on Valentine's Day for people to document lizard sex. And now...
It's a little perverted.
Yeah, right. But it captures people's attention, right? So now we have, from people, 177 observations of lizard sex. Right? That's okay. But what's significant is that, to your point, right? You've got the geotag for it. You've got the date, the location, and the environment. So it happens in trees, it happens in fences, it happens on sidewalks. Sometimes there are threesomes. This is all information that now, from his point of view, beyond just documenting the biodiversity, we actually can get behavioral information. So it's the kind of the new way of getting information about species. So continuing to generate these research questions, that certainly is going to be a drive of the UNRC at the museum. But really trying to reach out into as many communities as possible to engage people in this work. And we know that the kind of profile of the classic community scientist is someone who's educated, but there's no reason to say that it has to be that way. We want to make sure that our school kids are doing this, and people everywhere can see the results of their observations. That's what science is, the basics of science is observation. So I think that along with all of this information coming in, we're going to be able to see what is, in the environment, how it's changing, because it changes rapidly over time with the invasive species coming in and the, on the nursery plants that people are putting in. But also, I believe that this work will create increased conservation awareness, and that kids who are engaged in community science, making observations, are going to carry that with them, and they're going to think about conservation principles. I think it's a great entryway into science. So I think there are a lot of things that this work will do in 5 years, and I would hope that that every year we're going to keep upping the number of participants, and that we see that we're going to find new species, new first state records, county records every year doing this that will really help with the Biodiversity Atlas.
Yeah, definitely really a big reason to get excited. We have people at UCLA, I never thought there'd be this sort of study going on where they're looking at, what mammals do we actually see in the built environment? And they're looking at all of Los Angeles County to do so. And you're so used to everyone doing that in the Santa Monicas or the Angeles Forest or on the wetlands, et cetera, but to actually just only focus in the built environment, I really feel like, you guys have really led the way in having people look for biodiversity in the built environment rather than just in our protected areas. Mia, we're in a pretty exciting time, I think, in that the city of Los Angeles, they have their first sustainable city plan. The county of Los Angeles is developing their first ever county sustainability plan. Both of these plans, C of LA has a biodiversity component to it. It's not very fleshed out. It's something that they really want to improve dramatically. The county obviously wants to do that. They've been dealing with these sorts of issues really more through planning over the years, through protection of significant environmental areas and the like. I was really fascinated by the fact that, here you are, landscape design firm, and you actually went to the expense of putting together a wildlife corridor study in the urban environment. And obviously you've worked tremendously over the years in providing park space that's not just the old way of thinking of park space, but actually bringing nature to the public. Why don't you reflect a little bit more on how you think the wildlife corridor work that you've done can really sort of change the way we deal with underparked communities, since obviously that's such a big issue throughout Los Angeles County where people don't even live within half a mile of a park, which is unacceptable. But do it in a manner that really is going to enhance nature and provide connectivity.
Thank you. I will point out that I grew up in the tropics, and when I first showed up at the Natural History Museum for the project, there were all these parakeets that lived on the Coricias that are clearly tropical, and they fly from Malibu to downtown on a regular basis. So it was a really eye-opening experience about also how habitat is so adaptable. And it's sad. Somebody let those birds, out of the cage, but there they are, and they're pretty cute. They're really cute, and they cause a lot of ruckus. So hopefully those trees won't come down just to get rid of those parakeets one day. But I think that the interesting sort of situation we find ourselves in is all these corridors, like roads and freeways and rivers, are really allowing us this opportunity to do sort of restoration work and, to enhance connectivity in a significant way. So you look at it as at least a canvas that hasn't been polluted by a certain kind of development, but, when you think of the river as the river and the rivers, and also all the tributaries as channels, and you think as the sort of corridors where all the high tension wires go, these becomes this if you really map it, you end up with this really important network that, one of the things we discovered, for example, of course, the coyotes have made themselves very, very present, right? And so when we designed the Vista Hermosa Park, the 10 acres near downtown, there was always the idea that it would be, basically open dawn to dusk, and there was a lot of fear about, what would happen there in terms specifically about the 3 gangs in the neighborhood. But the coyotes found it, and they're the safest, So you have they jumped, God knows how many barriers to get there, and they found little places to nest, and they're there. They leave during the day, they come back at night, and I just think the opportunity now is to really look at those publicly held sort of land areas, and to figure out how to best sort of integrate them into the sort of the communities that are in dire need of access to this kind of level of connectivity. I mean, humans. Mm-hmm. So this integration between the humans and the habitat. And I think it's happening, whether it's the Arroyo Seco or Bayona Creek. You find the bicyclists, but you also have an increased sort of population of bird life. And more and more people are, basically going to those places and having a level of comfort. People do go fishing in the LA River. And, they actually catch, very significant fish. And people come there from the inner city to sort of explore and understand and relate to nature in an unusual way. So I'm very optimistic about how all these corridors and these patches and these pieces, can all sort of come together.
Be connected. So one of the things this sort of brings up, and I think a couple of you guys alluded to this, is this whole issue of native versus invasives. Mm-hmm. And if you're trained as a biologist, you're like, get the invasives out of here. That doesn't count as nature.
Yeah, the parakeets have to go. Sorry.
There you go. Right.
Cut the trees down.
And so
Loud in the morning too.
And so to many people, obviously, biodiversity, there's no concern about whether it's native versus non-native. It's just, it's biodiversity, and it's different species for its own sake. What you do in the urban environment is really up in the air from the standpoint of the decisions we make to really enhance biodiversity. And just sort of throwing out a couple examples for you guys to talk about, is obviously we've seen this unprecedented social engineering investment of over $500 million in the last, 4 years to change people's love affair with their lawns, mm-hmm. And get them removed, mm-hmm. and put in something instead of turf. Mm-hmm. What do you put in? Obviously AstroTurf and gravel would probably not be the right thing, but a lot of people have done that. But you can imagine a lot of potential there in what we're going to do. There's a lot of debate that really started in a huge way because of the drought and the impacts on our street trees, where many street trees were becoming diseased and attacked by invasive species like the shot-hole borer, and others just literally fell down. I had 2 in my backyard that fell down just because of the lack of water. Okay, blame me, everybody, but but it does bring up the question for our street tree palette, kind of a bizarre patchwork of trees that we have here within the region. Certainly, the planting of natives for trees is very rare, and does that make sense for our urban fabric? So you look at these sorts of everyday choices that are made by our institutions and that we make at home. Are there things we should be doing to sort of enhance biodiversity in the region through those decisions? What do you guys think about that?
looking at me.
Could have been any one of you three.
I think our scientists would want to know if there are choices that can be made that would privilege native species and maybe help with this invasive species question, right? So I'm a geologist. I can't begin to even talk about what plants you might want to put in, but certainly, Mia, it seems like something you would
Yes.
have a keen interest
by
in,
the
as
way,
our
we-
gardener would.
By the way, we have geology in common.
Yay.
It's an interesting conversation we have with the city a lot, and especially with the shot hole bore. And when you talk to some of the researchers, like at UC Riverside, they say that our oaks and our sycamores and other native trees would probably be able to fight off shot hole bore if they were sort of properly watered in the initial stages. Remember, they're coming into a heat island moment, like much hotter than they are used to. And if they are managed properly, they will survive better. So a level of attention to maintenance to our urban forest is critical for us to move forward. And that isn't only the street trees in the public realm, but it's also people in their backyards understanding better what it is that they could do. But the funding to actually manage the urban forests is extremely important. The other factor I want to bring up is
I was just to riff on that a little bit. I'm not saying I know a lot about this, but I've talked to a number of cities. I have not found a city that has, a forester on their staff that chooses their tree palette, where one of the parameters that they use is actually ecological value. Have you run into that yet?
I would say that that it probably happens in the, I don't know, maybe in the People's Republic of Santa Monica.
No.
No?
I can vouch for that. As a Santa
I
Monica,
know.
nice try.
Any Santa Monica? No. Well,
I've chaired their task force on the environment for 26 years.
Oh, okay. Well, when it comes to the tree choices that we had for the Annenberg Beach house, it definitely was a factor, and that was part of the lens through which they looked at this issue. But, you have a point. We have a lot of work to do, and we have a lot of work to do in terms of the water and the water quality that we're using. But because if we're using reclaimed water for any of this work, especially in terms of the urban forest, we're not in good shape. The water has a lot of salt from reclamation plants, so the
It
quality
depends what level of treatment you're doing at the reclamation plant. Just saying.
No, I know. So you know a lot more, but I'm just saying that developing a parameters in terms of what cities or what reclamation plants deliver to cities for street water, purple
Needs
pipe
to be
water,
high quality, right?
needs to be manageable for this kind of irrigation.
And I will sort of say, Mark, in doing these sort of transformations of lawns, you're sort of as a scientist that gets the juices flowing, because you're sort of setting up a natural experiment there where you could look at the diversity of birds or of insects in these in converted lawns and compare them in the exact same neighborhood, same climate to places that haven't been converted, and start to sort of assess, which trees are better. It's probably, and we discussed this earlier, it's probably if you wait for all the facts that come in, it's probably going to be too late. So, my suggestion would be to start converting now and get some undergrads out there to do cool research.
So if we can find anybody to fund such research that has been glaringly missing, believe it or not, you would think $500 million in investment, those sorts of, throw a few bucks on the research side to see what's going on. Believe it or not, that hasn't happened. So either Metropolitan Water District or DWP, they're not looking at any of these issues at all on the ecological side, which is really interesting. It's a lost opportunity, but not too late. So one of the other things that's happening in the city that's kind of interesting is because of this biodiversity issue, and they're redoing their sustainable city plan, sort of 2.0 right now. They're updating their goals, and as part of that, they're probably going to announce very soon. They've run this Singapore Index, which looking at urban biodiversity that was first used in Singapore, that now other cities around the world are sort of looking at, that may or may not be appropriate for Los Angeles. And I think the conclusion of the people putting that together for the city of LA, some UCLA grad students, was that probably not so much, but at least from the standpoint of looking at the issue is pretty exciting. Do you think that creating sort of an LA-specific biodiversity index or any related policy or anything like that, is that going to help us really deal with these issues and really better embrace and actually have an impact on biodiversity, create more of those, more connectivity as you were talking about, or even change the way we do design in a way that's more embracing of native species? What do you guys think?
I think that obviously it's a lot about communication and the level of communication and branding that happens around this issue. So I think, for example, the DROP campaign associated with water conservation did a lot. I mean, just seeing things on buses and bus stops, just understanding, we're in a water crisis, we understand it better. I think people don't know what biodiversity is. And at a time when we, by the way, have a huge issue in terms of just shelter, I don't want to go into that, but it is a very painful issue that we're seeing every day. This seems like a bit of a luxury to be talking about some of these issues, but I do think that clarifying and really trying to keep a high bar. We have incredible universities, students, community groups that are really interested in the issues, and they want to be in LA. So giving them, sort of a framework by which to make decisions and understand the issues makes a lot of sense.
Okay, can I flip out about the Singapore Index for a second?
Yes,
Please.
that was
Okay.
the Singaporean Index.
Yeah, so just to give you some numbers, so the Singapore Index was created in Singapore, and just for birds, if you're, right? Good name.
Where'd they come up with that?
Thank you. That's why I'm on the panel. No. So what happens is the Singapore Index for birds, if you have greater than 68 birds in an area, you get the highest possible level for the Singapore Index. You are doing great biodiversity-wise. Now, I just told you LA County has over 500 bird species. So clearly the Singapore, we could lose 400 of those and we're still like, hey, we're doing great. UCLA, I didn't sort of follow this up. In 1929, had 115 species of birds. We're currently down to 75 on campus. So we've lost 40 species of birds on campus. They're not extinct, but they're no longer on campus. So I think that the Singapore Index, like an LA version of that, is great because it gives us some accountability. We have a number that we can say, here's how many birds, here's how many insects we estimate to be in the city. And if our goal is to keep or maintain that biodiversity, never mind, I'm not even going for expanding it, but if we were to just keep the biodiversity where it is, it gives us that baseline so that if we in 5 years revisit number of birds in the city and that number has dropped significantly, we can say, oh, okay, something's wrong here. So I think we sort of have to play by the numbers in this case, and I think an LA specific index would help us do that.
Yeah, great. Why don't we open it up to the audience at this point, which is always scary, mostly because I can't see anybody very well. So anybody have any questions? Ryan's favorite Dunkin' Donut, anybody?
If you name a bird species, I'll tell you whether we should get rid of it or not.
Okay. Yep.
I had a question for Mia and perhaps also for Lori. So you both mentioned the importance of patches and corridors, and Lori, you also mentioned the obstacle of a lot of this being private land. And so the question that I had was this. I mean, clearly gardens are really important in a 2/3 suburban kind of urban structure like Los Angeles. But the tendency, and this would be my question for Mia, the tendency seems to have been not just the conversion from lawns to other kinds of ground cover, but the tearing down of older building structures that are small and surrounded by modest gardens with lot line properties that simply don't have any outdoor space other than maybe a swimming pool. So, and I've become increasingly alarmed about this because we're at sort of plot by plot, we seem to be losing even the possibility of planting whatever plants might enhance biodiversity. And that becomes particularly tricky for me to think about when it actually conflicts with other priorities that, or when it actually goes along with other priorities that environmentalists also have. So in my neighborhood in Venice, there was recently, a fairly vigorous protest against a 3-story condo building that's being planned in place of 3 small 1-story bungalows that are there now. And I feel ambivalent about that because I like those little old bungalows with their gardens too. On the other hand, we also need greater urban density, right? So how do we think greater biodiversity and greater density together? And are there any kind of design solutions to this fact that we have these lot line to lot line properties increasingly now where you don't have gardens, you may not have the old indoor-outdoor lifestyle anymore?
So, thank you for bringing that up because it is a big concern for me, and I actually think zoning regulations about the size of buildings being built, especially in single-family areas. Obviously, the loss of good soil is a factor. You brought that up earlier. It's really hard. Soil. I wish, I think we do have, as part of a biodiversity index, this, the loss of what I would call part of the urban forests should be measured. So every lot in Bel Air, which was usually dotted with incredibly beautiful vegetation and beautiful trees, and big, you look at Bel Air in 2000, Bel Air in 2010, and there's a marked difference. And it is something that planning in Los Angeles could actually help manage. And, I wish I could say, and we are doing, for example, an adaptive reuse project in downtown Los Angeles over a building on 8th and Broadway, which was the original May Company, sort of the first May Company in LA. And we're building a 2-acre park on the roof. And it's going to be a beautiful park, and it's great. But does it, basically replace a 2-acre area on grade? I don't know. I mean, I think it's better than not having it, but is it, how to manage the built environment in terms of what is on grade that actually gets water down to the groundwater table or the aquifer, whatever you want to call it, and gets trees to shade pedestrians and really do the capturing of and sequestering of the air and air quality that we need. I just think it should be part of some form of management because it's a problem.
So I would add a couple things. One is just so people know, believe it or not, there were lessons learned on the turf removal programs. And so there are cities like LA, Santa Monica, and Long Beach that, they've changed the way they're doing the program, and Metropolitan Water District's about to. to make sure that these horrific sorts of replacements aren't occurring anymore. So like AstroTurf certainly isn't eligible for funding anymore, and you need a certain amount of plant cover now. Climate appropriate but not native. I'd love to see it get to the point of being native, but we're not at that point yet. So there are some things that are happening in that regard. One of the things that I see in the water world, Mia, as you were talking about that made me think about Ursula's question in what you were saying, is that in the water world in the city of Santa Monica, they've had a net zero water requirement. So like if somebody puts in a new building and, for whatever reason, they expand beyond maybe what they're zoned to do or whatever, but if they're removing trees, there can be no net loss of trees, or maybe even a net positive of trees if somebody puts in an ordinance like that to really do something like that. And so that's what's happening in Santa Monica on the water side. So you see all this mixed-use development going in Santa Monica, and people go, how can that happen? We're trying to keep our water consumption down. And the end result is you can't use any more water than the pre-existing development that was there. And if you can't do that with your new development, then you have to pay an in lieu fee to have interventions elsewhere nearby where that development's occurring. So it's a concept that I think can apply on the tree side as well. It's a possibility. Questions? Yes.
Probably loud enough anyway. But here we
I think they record.
So the question I have is, we know that there's a lot more tenants, whether you're an apartment owner, or a condo owner, or you're living in apartments, and you have a very small plot. You don't even really have a plot, but you might have a little balcony, or you might have a little terrazzo or something, but it's very small. Homeowners tend to get lots of help trying to get trees or shrubs or plants that are great for native life. But there's still a lot of space that combined together, if we had our opportunities to get shrubs or small trees onto some of these plots, that we could create these corridors that you're talking about. And there's many people that want to support it, but there's not much there that I can see of that's out, for the people to kind of use. Whereas homeowners have that ability. We, as people who rent or people who have small apartments, don't get anything. And we can also be a big part of helping this problem.
So help, when you say help with anything, meaning with ideas?
Like tree people will give people a free tree. Or there are certain nurseries where if you buy a lot, then you can get a really great discount. But if you can't have a lot because you only have a small portion of land, why are you not given that discount? Why are you not given a dwarf tree to put up somewhere in your back area, in your patios? I'm just curious if there's any way to kind of try to maximize that, because clearly we, as the lady said before, we have a lot of, need for people in housing, and there are those that have balconies and terrazzos and little places to put things, but there's nothing there in place for them.
I'm on the zoning advisory committee, and we have a meeting this week. I think this is a really interesting question to bring up.
Yeah, incentives. That's right.
Yes. Any other questions? That's a far one. Hopefully there's someone near.
And it would make a difference. Yes.
By the way, we are the most invasive species and maybe the most dangerous, including to ourselves. But I digress. You mentioned efforts about the Department of Water Power. There was a time around 2005, about 2 or 3 years there, when they had a very innovative director who was trying to come up with ways to stimulate the development of xeric and natural plantings in public spaces in Los Angeles County. I know because I attended a meeting there, and so did Huell Hauser. Huell Hauser was there during the luncheon. But I was there because I happened to know that at Harvey Mudd College, a group of students had worked for a year on what they called a clinic project. It's a special project where they study scientifically and other factors what would be the effects of a naturally, regionally consistent landscaping program for the college campus and, in fact, for the Claremont area. It was a rather extensive study that looked at various things, the costs of grass and the effects of lawn mowing and the water usage, also the aesthetic values that would come with a transformation. They created a special little garden there that the students looked at, and it came up very favorably. And I wonder, is there any effort now, I'll wait till you're finished there, is there any effort now to get the Water and Power Company back on board with doing that kind of thing? They've done it in the past, they tried.
So I'll try to answer that. So there's a state model landscape ordinance, and I am really sorry, I do not know what the acronym stands for, but it's MWELO, M-W-E-L-O. The state passed it, and there's not a firm requirement for individual cities to implement it for each and every new and redevelopment. But there are many, many cities throughout California that have. And so this is still, believe it or not, a priority for Department of Water and Power. And like I said, they've completely reformed their turf removal program. They still offer $2 per square foot for turf removal with pretty strict requirements that probably would fit many of the exact parameters at which you're talking about. So the combination of those two things that are out there and the other thing that's going on right now with an uncertain fate, you may have heard of a bill that's being discussed. It's in the second year of a 2-year bill discussion. Conservation is a way of life. And there's 3 different authors. Laura Friedman's one of them from the Glendale area that are looking specifically at one of these components would be on the landscape side and really trying to deal with a lot of the things that you're talking about. But what everybody's think is third rail, because I can tell you we talk about it at Metropolitan Water District all the time, is that if you dictate to landowners what they actually plant, you really start getting in trouble pretty quickly. I don't agree with that. I think in some regards it's worth that. In some times, I don't know what you think, but that's really where the tension is. You could probably tell people what not to plant, but telling them what to plant starts getting you in a pretty difficult area.
You know, I was thinking, as you mentioned, the Claremont colleges, that we have a lot of private land and state land in LA that is managed by educational institutions. And as a former college president, I can say that students can have a huge voice, right? In what can happen on campuses. And imagine if institutions started to really think about the kinds of plantings, had plant palettes that weren't just for aesthetics, or for the way the alumni like to see their campuses, but actually, was really kind of devised around what would be best for native species, and had an educational mission that they have to talk about the benefits of doing that, so that folks who push back against it would, at least you'd have a great argument to make. And there's a lot of land out there that's controlled by educational systems. It might be easier to do that on a campus basis in some ways than thinking about a city making a decision about a plant palette, for example. Just an idea.
Some fine institutions that are a stone's throw away from here have a hard time.
That you've worked on?
That I've worked on that, I talk to you about periodically. I mean, it's hard to go the distance, right?
I know, right.
Lawn area, big, large lawns are nice to look at, right? And even if the option is to maybe change it to a different variety of meadow or lawn, it's interesting. It's spotty, right? Like I honestly think that Pomona, Pitzer, and those universities are on board, and they're making big changes. Yeah. And I think the governor has a little bit of work to do in the UCs. Is all I have to say.
Oh, the governor. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. A couple more questions.
Thank you. Could you comment on that topic with the view of how do you get it maintained? I actually work at a school. I was actually going to ask a question about iNaturalist at schools, but then I was thinking that the public land, like you were saying, publicly owned properties, if you want to stitch together. So, elementary schools are a mile apart, maybe.
Right.
So, any self-respecting coyote can get from one to the next.
Right.
Probably a raccoon can get from one to the next.
Correct.
So if there were more habitat on those little public spaces, maybe that would really add to the biodiversity. Kids love it. You could, okay, but you have a very large public educational institution called LA Unified that has essentially zero maintenance budget, and they like lawns because it's mow and blow. You can do it. They're not interested in figuring out which native plants to leave and which weeds to whack.
An interesting thing that could come up is there's going to be a funding measure on the ballot in November on local water and stormwater, and a lot of people are looking at schools as being a major part of the solution there, in really diverting runoff flows to schools, putting in these sorts of multi-use benefit features, hopefully that are maximizing habitat value and providing connectivity, which is not a highlight of what's being talked about. But those revenues, if this passes, would be sort of a new source of funds where, unlike a bond measure where you can only pay to build something, it's just capital improvement only. This would be frankly a parcel tax, and a parcel tax can be used for operation and maintenance. And so if that happens, you could potentially start seeing transformation of schools and the operation and maintenance of doing the sort of thing that Mia's done in a bunch of schools, that really can provide this degree of connectivity. But right now, I agree, the resources aren't there.
So yeah, maintenance and operations, whether it comes associated with the urban forest, which means forestry, having more funding, because we're on a 15 to 25 year cycle for trimming trees in Los Angeles, never mind watering or trimming. But in terms of the schools, it really comes to it's the onus, unfortunately, and I've been dealing with LA Unified schools since my kids were in elementary school. And it just comes with the passion of the parents and the teachers, and it happens. It just does happen. The school you saw up there was Eagle Rock, and it was a school that one of our senior people was basically very passionate about. It took about 10 years to get that school turned around, but there's a lot of involvement. So I just would say, we worked on the sort of the federal courthouse in downtown Los Angeles, and we did basically a chaparral hillside with some oaks on the top, and we tried to really pixelate what the chaparral would look like as we planted it and see what would happen. We're really excited, and we show up about a month later, and they have basically poodled the hillside. And this is a relatively sophisticated client, but it's a very sophisticated client. They were mortified, but they just hired the wrong people who didn't understand. And so it is a generation of sort of education and change. I'm actually surprised with a little bit with the tenor of some of the questions and conversations, because I can go to when I'm a client, a residential client, or a school, or a private client, and it is not even a question that water conservation matters. It's not even a question that native plants, and they're curious and interested. And when you're dealing with some of the smaller cities of the 88 cities, there's requirements, and you got to go get your permit, and the permit has irrigation and planting lists, and you have to meet those requirements.
That's probably related to this model Muello ordinance that I was talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's 9 o'clock, and so just to wrap up, I think what you've heard is that we're at a pretty interesting moment in time in Los Angeles, where these sorts of discussions really hadn't happened in earnest from the standpoint of at City Hall, at the Hall of Administration, in a serious manner. It's always been about individual projects, but not looking at a whole city and what we could potentially do to change our relationship with biodiversity. So I think it's a really unique time. We didn't even get into some of the issues like reintroducing extirpated species, which I thought for sure someone would ask about. A couple of those sorts of questions, but you can imagine that's going to be a hot topic moving forward. Obviously, what you might do in restoration in an area like a Malibu Creek is going to be substantially different than what you would do in Compton Creek. And how do you work with the community to actually arrive with those sorts of decisions is definitely a big challenge ahead. The LA River obviously is going to be the ultimate hotspot on that particular issue, and we'll talk about that in a few months here at the Hammer as well. But with that, thank you guys so much for attending. Let's give a round of applause for our panelists.
Thank you.